If your gimbal aren't performing correctly and you're struggling with shaky footage, you're probably wondering if there's something wrong with your gimbal. But trust me, it's not the gimbal that's the problem. I've been there myself, wasting countless hours trying different combinations, buying new gimbals, thinking that maybe this new gimbal will be better. But none of this matters unless you have adjusted these settings correctly. And there are often one very important setting that many tend to overlook, and it's called deadband. Because if you don't have the deadband set correctly, the micro movements when we do with our hands while operating the gimbal will be noticeable and lead to shaky or wobbly footage. So let me explain to you not just how, but also why this setting can make or break your footage. And once you get this adjusted right, it's like blowing new air into a gimbal, and it will completely transform your footage. Hey there, my name is Peter. I am the creator of the Gimbal Academy, and I will teach you how to get the most out of your gimbal. And if you don't know anything about me, I have a long history of working with gimbals, and my channel is packed with amazing gimbal videos and tutorials. So today I'll show you how to adjust the deadband correctly, but I will also show you how to dial in the smoothness of your gimbal. Just be aware that on some gimbals, the deadband can only be adjusted within the app. Today I'll be adjusting all the settings on the DJI-3, but the principle will apply to any gimbal, no matter which one you have. Before we start adjusting any settings on the gimbal, make sure that you got your camera on there with all the accessories, and then the gimbal is properly balanced. I won't go over how you do this today because I've already made that video. But what we can do is that we can check how good the balance is on the gimbal. There's a couple ways we can do that. We can go into this to the start menu here. You can see this little green box where the camera is on. This indicates that we have good balance. But if you want to calibrate it, make sure that you got good balance on all motors. Go into the menu, you pull down here, you go into the little settings icon there, and you scroll down until you find Gimbal Auto Check. You press this one, and here you can calibrate it and check that all motors are good. Press confirm, and it'll start moving around. Always hold on to the gimbal because it's moving. Alright, once this is done, it says Auto Check complete, gimbal status is good, and you can press confirm. You can go back to the main menu, and you can go into this little icon here where you can see how the balance is. And you can see if we move the gimbal around, those small bars start to move, and when they're in the green or you can't see them, then they're good. Now that we got the gimbal properly balanced, it's time to take a look at the motor settings. And the first thing I always do when I've set up the gimbal is that I auto-tune the gimbal. So you can do this in a couple of ways. You can press the auto tune there and press start calibrate, or you can hold down the front trigger and the M button in 4 or 5 seconds, and it will start auto tune. There we go, and it calibrates and auto tunes the gimbal's balance to the motors. There we go, gimbal calibration complete, and now we can go into the settings and adjust them if needed. And I only adjust the settings if I have vibrations coming from any of the motors. But let's just go into the settings right here. We go into the motor parameters in the app because we can't adjust them on the gimbal. So the first thing we'll take a look at is called basic, and it's stiffness. And there you can see mine here says 56, 50 and 68. And when I hold on to any of the motors, I don't have any vibrations, so I wouldn't mess with that. I'll just leave it as it is. But what we can take a look at is under advanced. We'll go into advanced and then strength, because the strength helps with the smoothness of the gimbal. If the strength is too high, you won't get a smooth transition in the end. I normally won't have this set to more than 15, and I usually set it to 15 on the tilt and 15 on the pan. And the roll I just leave as it is. And this one it's 7, so it could be even a 7, 10 or anything like that. But don't go over 15 because then you might get vibrations. So just leave it as it is, and then we're done with the basic motor settings. Let's talk deadband, because this is one of the most important settings that many tend to overlook and don't really know what it is, because you can't adjust it on the gimbal. You have to use the app. So you don't know what deadband does, you're screwed. So deadband makes the gimbal react or gives you a longer delay when you're using your hands on the gimbal. Right now the gimbal is set to the default settings, which is medium, and also the follow speed is also medium. And as you can see, the gimbal reacts pretty fast to my movement, even though it looks super smooth. But as soon as I move my hand, the gimbal will move, and there isn't much room for error. So that's why we need to change deadband. So let me show you where I do that, because we do that in the app. So you go into the user profile right here. First, let's go into deadband and change this to high. And then also let's change follow speed to slow. Let me show you how the gimbal reacts now. Now you can see we got a much smoother gimbal than we had before, and I can actually wiggle around with my hand without the gimbal moving. So there's a lot more room for error, and you will get a much smoother transition when you work with the gimbal. So I recommend always keep it at a high, because you can't go in and change it on the go on the gimbal. So keep it on high and then change the follow speed along as you go, or change them as you need them for the certain kind of shoots. Let's take a look at the user profiles and the custom settings and how I have this set up on the DJI IS 3. So we are going to use the app because we can't change all the values from the gimbal, which is actually pretty annoying. But let's jump into the app and see how it's set up. Go into user profiles down in the corner and we have it in PF mode, and you can see it's set to slow and high as we set it in the deadband section, and that made the gimbal react super smoothly. But if you want to see my custom settings, they're a bit different. You go into custom, there you can customize the settings to your needs. I have it in PF mode. I set all the parameters to 30. I find that as a really good sweet spot for my work, and I have the deadband set to 6. And then you might say, why don't you have it at 10 when you have it on high? Because high on the profiles are not the same as 10. So for me, 6 is a sweet spot. When I shoot real estate, I want the gimbal to react very, very smoothly, or other things that where I have a smooth gimbal with smooth transitions. But if you're shooting other things, that might be different for you. Let's take a look at the next one, which is PTF. And we jump into this one right here. The PTF, again, you can go with slow and high, and that will be perfect for most occasions. But my custom settings are a bit different. Custom right here, you can see 20, 30, 20, and the reason why I have it on 20, 30, 20 is because 20 on the tilt gives me a bit faster on the transition right here, which I want when I'm using the tilt mode. And on deadband, I've also a different kind of custom settings. I have changed the value on the tilt to 4 because that gives me a faster delay, or a smaller delay when I'm tilting down. And then lastly, I have FPV set to custom because I don't use FPV, so my custom settings on the FPV is just set to 1, I think. It doesn't really matter what you set it to because the gimbal is locked and I don't have to use the trigger to kind of hold it in place. So if you don't use FPV, put it into lock mode so you have a custom lock on your gimbal. For the joystick, I also have the joystick to react very smoothly and slowly, so that's under control. And then you go into motion, and I've set those to high, slow, high on all of the values, pan, tilt, and roll. And this way I get a very, very smooth joystick, so I can do minor adjustments. The endpoint, leave that as it is from the default settings. And then I have the push mode set to pan and tilt, so I can move the tilt mode without it going back to the default position. The last thing we want to change before you leave is the wheel. Here I always have this to tilt, and the only way we can change that is on the gimbal. So when you're in the main menu right here, you can see you can pull up, and then you can see the dial function is right there, and you can change that to whatever you want. I have it set to the tilt mode, and then the dial speed is set for 25. And the last thing is the dial smoothness, which I have set to 29. Then you say, why don't you just have it on 30? Because if you go up to 30, it nearly doesn't move. 29 is for me the sweet spot. It has a nice smooth transition right there. So that's how I set my custom settings up. If you want the settings, you can go down and grab the PDF where I have all the settings. I have also an extended version where you will get a quick guide of how to set the gimbal up so it reacts super smoothly. There's a guide of how to balance the gimbal correctly. You can see all of the settings for the DJI 3, the DJI 3 Pro. And then lastly, I have a checklist of what I do before I go to a shoot. And then I've listed all of the accessories that I use for this gimbal, so that if there's anything you find interesting, you can just find it in there. But if you're still struggling with getting super smooth shots, I recommend you go watch this video right here.
after, it brings it to life. And like the skin tones aren't like getting washed out. It's just giving.
Recently, I shared how you can save Magic Mask 2 in DaVinci Resolve 20 by taking the blue mask output from the Magic Mask node to the green RGB output of the color page, then back on the edit page re-render the mask in place so we never have to retrack Magic Mask in future versions. But today, let's dive further in Fusion and learn how to really refine the rendered Magic Mask and fix bad edges and just give that AI generated mask some of your personal manual artist touch. Chapters are marked. Step 1, slap comp. I generated out some different images here to use as different backgrounds, but I want to show you how you can combine these quickly in Fusion. If you just want to do that without any of the extra refinement, what I'll do, because I already rendered this out, this is a ProRes file, I don't need this on my timeline anymore. I want to get back to my native color pixels. I will right click on my clip, I'll say decompose to original, and then I'm going to right click again and say remove attributes because it's black because it's showing an unrendered Magic Mask. Hit apply, and now we can go into Fusion and try out some of these different backgrounds and sort of see how these might work rather than having this shed in the background. That's what I thought would be fun to do today. So we're going to Fusion, and once we open up Fusion, I'm working mid-flow vertical. It's the top-down layout under workspaces if you want to do that. I always need to bring my media out down below, so I'm working top-down. I need to go to my media pool. Just click that to grab our background images in. So I've got 3 of those that I'm pulling in. So media in 2, 3, and 4 look like this, this, and this. And all of this footage is going to be available on Cutting Club if you join. It's a great way to support the channel. Nonetheless, I need to pull in my roto, the rendered out Magic Mask shot, right? And that's under my renders folder right here. So here's my rendered out roto. How do I apply this to the footage so I can comp one over the other? Well, the idea is to comp in Fusion, you just merge what you want on top over what you want behind. So you take the output of what you want on top, okay, this is the output of what I want on top, over what I want behind, and just kiss these 2 outputs, and that will actually automatically generate a merge. So the point of these nodes is the color matters, the position doesn't really matter. So yellow means background, green's foreground. Here's the comp, but it has no mask. It doesn't know what to cut out yet. That's kind of the point of this guy right here, but there's no mask generated, or there's no alpha channel generated out of this when you render as ProRes 422, which is what I like to do. But we can generate the alpha really easily using a tool that's called bitmap. So let's do that. I'm going to move this up out of the way. I'm going to add a tool called bitmap with shift space. And the bitmap tool also has a mask input, so just be careful how you connect this. But I'm going to take the output of the rendered out Magic Mask, stick this into the yellow background of bitmap, and once I do this, nothing really happens. I pick and flick to load it into the viewer. The reason why is the channel is really key to how you set this up. So I want to make sure the channel here is set to luminance, and now we actually have an alpha channel. I can stick this directly into the merge, and there we go, we have a slap comp. If we take the output of merge, go back to media out, go to the edit page and say, oh, we're done. Here's our before, shift D, here's our after. But we have so much more we can do to this to make this really, really nice and refine the mask, core mask, and edge mask. Originally, if we take a look at just our mask over here, this bitmap tool, I want to point something out. We don't actually have a real solid mask to begin with. And the tool that's going to be really helpful for us in discovering this sort of stuff, if you open up the sub-view menu, which you can hit with the V, Victor key, and then come up here and change this to the color inspector, what happens here is the actual coordinate of the pixel that the cursor is sitting on tells you the code value there in the upper left. So 0.99805 is what I have in the center of this mask here, and that's not fully opaque. That means there's actually some transparency that's going to happen when we view this merged with stuff. If there was stuff that was different underneath, we're actually going to see some of that image underneath. We don't want that. We want to fill that in with a core matte that's solid, but actually still retain all the detail of some of the edge, you know, on the beard and that sort of thing here. So the way we do this is we end up using 2 different masks and we merge those together. So we combine those 2 and get the best of both worlds. I'm going to take a copy of this bitmap tool. The only thing we've changed about it is just we've made it look at the luminance of the rendered out Magic Mask. Take a copy of it, so Command C, click, Command V, and on this version of it, we're gonna make the core mat. Okay, so on this one over here, in fact, let's rename it. I'll hit Function F2 and just call this one core or hard mat. It's got lots of different names. But on this one, what I will do to firm up the inside of here is I'll come over here to the inspector and sort of double click in this high value and then move your cursor so you can change the value in the inspector while your cursor is parked over the image. So to change it, I'm using the arrow keys on the keyboard, left, right, up, down. And then you can also add numbers with the number pad, which is what I'm doing here. So I need to decrease this until my alpha value hits 1. There it goes. It hit 1 right around, somewhere around there. So that has filled out. This is completely solid right here. The other thing to know is if you don't have your clip black and clip white checked, you'll start sending this over 1. So it's a good idea. You see it's red. It's 1.00035. It's a good idea to generally keep these checked, especially when you're working on alpha channel manipulations. The other thing is we want to suck this in and firm up anything that is sort of flickering and gray, anything that's out here. There may be some values. In fact, you see right here, if I come here, there's stuff hidden behind the scenes that you're not aware of. See, the alpha value is 0.00354. We can't see that, but we do have a tool that lets us see this a little bit better, and that's called the gain and gamma slider. I have it open up down here, but if you don't, just the shortcut way to actually see your gain and gamma slider is to hold this button. This is your view LUT right here, and that'll be turned on automatically if you have color management turned on, which I do, so we're working in linear. But you just turn up the gamma on this. So this is called gamma slamming, so we can actually see what's actually happening there a little bit better on any sort of viewer. It's not changing the image, it's just giving us a better way of viewing that. So you can see, indeed, there's actually alpha values here that I probably don't want that were from the AI rendered mask. So to clean those up, we can take this core mat. We're gonna do this in a couple ways. First, on the core mat, I'm gonna take the low value, which is what represents that black area, and I will just choke that in. And I don't need to necessarily have my cursor over here while I'm doing this. This is just more crude. And I'm gonna pull this in, so this core mat is gonna sit inside the edge mat. So I've got 2 mats here. So this one should be pretty hard with no feathering between the two. In fact, I will just bring this down even further to try to get this so we're going straight from 1 to 0, something like that. So up here, there's actually some funny business going on where there's some transparency coming on. So remember, the right side's affecting the white side of the image, and the left side is affecting the black side. So I've sort of firmed up that area that I had a little bit of a hole on that part of my shirt. So here's the core mat, here's the soft mat, but in order to combine these, generally you want to shrink the core mat in a little bit. So we're going to use a tool that's called Erode Dilate. Shift space Erode Dilate. Take this into the background of Erode Dilate, and what this is going to do is it's going to just shrink this in. You can see it's pulling those edges in a little bit further so that it can fit nicely, snugly inside of the edges. We're preserving those edges. And we'll also blur this as well. So shift space blur. We'll give a nice little bit of a soft fall off. Maybe you don't need the full value of 1. And the other thing on all these nodes, I think this gives you a little bit better performance boost. I turn off, if I'm only working on an alpha in the inspector, I turn off everything except for the alpha channel. So I'm not processing extra channels and pixels. Maybe it's not necessary, but I think it's helpful. So the idea is, here is my core mat, right? You can see this one is real solid. The edges are not very soft or detailed, but it fills in the solid center. And here's the edge mask, which is nice and soft, has that extra flicker there. I'm going to combine these. So how do you combine things in Fusion? You use a merge. Shift space, MRG. First, I'll take the soft edge mask. I'll stick that into the yellow background of it. Okay, and then I will take the core mat, the hard core mat, stick this into the foreground, green foreground, and now we have a combined mask. Now we still have this edge stuff to deal with because it comes from the original one, but we're going to deal with that in the next step, where we can control things using the color curves to sculpt that edge a little bit better. So now we're getting a little bit further. We're getting a little bit better. Let's take this and stick this into our slap comp. I'll bring my gamma slider back to where it was. And you can see, if we look at this before we had added this core mat to it, you can see we filled in those edges. So step 2, we're looking pretty good. color curves. I'm going to show you how you can color correct the edge to sculpt it using the curves tool to get rid of any of this extra flicker. So if I load the merge 2 into the viewer, I hit A for alpha, we bring our gamma slider up, you can see we still have quite a bit of that extra garbage there. We can clean this up a little bit further. And the curves tool is a great way to do it because it's really, really controllable. So I'm gonna hit shift space, start typing curves, and make sure you grab color curves, not hue curves. I'll take the output of the merge tool, stick this into the yellow background of curves. And once this is loaded up into the viewer, I'm gonna work on alpha only. Remember, we're just working on masks today. So I'm disabling the red, the green, the blue, and I'm gonna pin a point right at 0.5, right at the center gamma point, so that I'm not really adjusting that too much. So I'm gonna just click somewhere right there in the middle, and then I'll come back down here to my in, set that to 0.5, my out to 0.5. There we go, they're both at 0.5. And the nice thing about the curves tool is we have the ability, if you click in the middle of here and then lasso select this point, we have the ability of using some shortcut keys to flatten them out. So if I hit F to flatten, it kind of sculpted that edge. You see what just happened there? See that junk that went away? Without me even changing any other values other than putting a little bit of curve onto it, it cleaned that up. And I can do that on both ends if I need to. So if I want to take the other side of it, hit F to flatten, we can see what that does. Doesn't seem to be doing too much, so I might just actually take this low end. And the other thing that's nice to know, if you select this and just drag this number, we can really see how we're affecting that edge to get rid of any of that extra flicker that may exist in the alpha channel. As well as, just point this one out as a tip, if you open the spline editor down here, select the alpha, zoom to fit, you can do this in a much larger view as well down here, where you have the ability to select a point, hit T for transition. Let's do the zoom to fit, and you can drag this ease in and ease out value right here, which can really refine how you're sort of sculpting that edge. But that's enough of that. Let's take a look at what the result is now that we've cleaned that up even further there with a little bit of a lookup table over the color curves tool. We'll close the spline. Rather than taking the output of this soft comp, hard comp thing, let's take the output of this color curves result. Remember, that's where we came from. That's where we just went. Let's take the output of here, stick this into the mask input of our merge. So here's our result before adding the color curves, and here it is after. You can see we've cleaned that up quite a bit. If we take a look at it in the merge and bring our gamma back down to earth, we can see we've cleaned that up quite a bit. So we have a much cleaner edge. Combine real foreground. Now, what I'd like to do in this image here, I'm going to hit Command F, Control F to see the whole image. I actually want to take some of the original slope here and just use the background as a nice head extension. So how do we combine a separate mask into this? Well, it's really simple. We're just going to do that kind of like you did with the core mat and the edge mask. We're going to do that with a separate merge. So I'm going to take another mask tool, which is, this time I'm going to grab the polygon tool up here. And while looking at my media in one, I'm going to draw out the slope of this hill here in my backyard so I can get rid of this shed. I don't want that shed. I want to be out in the mountains, right? So I'm going to click a point here with the polygon tool. I always like to draw polygons and stuff disconnected at first so I can see whatever image I'm actually trying to work on. And I'm just clicking points. If you drag, it makes it like a smooth point somewhere along the grass line there. So that I'm going to feather this thing out and combine it with the magic mask result. Shift O will close the mask, so that's a good shortcut to know when you're using these masks. So I've got this mask here that we refined. I've got this mask here. How do you think we add these together? You guessed it, it's another merge. So I'm going to hit Shift Space MRG, or so you can do the kissing the output part too. I just want to show you the different ways. I'll take the output of the color curves tool, that part of that mask, into here, and I'll take this output, this polygon, stick this into the foreground, and we saw actually this will happen sometimes. It'll go into the mask input because it is a mask. We don't want to do that. I actually want this to go into the green foreground. So once it's done that, you can see that mask is combined. We probably need to feather off the edge of that, which is not going to be an issue, but just Command F real quick to show you how this will combine into our slap comp here. Is we just, rather than taking the output of just me, I take the output from here instead. So disconnect that, take this as our mask that's going into the merge, and see I've got the original foreground that's down here, that hill, but I'm using that new background. It looks pretty fake right now, But we can really simplify this and get this to blend much nicer by just on the polygon tool itself. If you select that, there's like a feathering tool that's built in that's kind of global and will just allow you to, if you just, actually let's do this by turning off the controls so you can see what's actually happening. You can do that up here by going to show controls. And this is a really important one to enable again once you turn it off, because you'll forget and you'll think your masts are broken. Command K is the shortcut. But yeah, essentially I'm still able to adjust this, but I can see the result of it without that green line being in the way. So something like this is actually blending pretty nicely, I would say. The other thing to be aware of with polygons when you draw them, they're ready to be rotoscoped. In fact, you see over here, right click for shape animation. Generally when I draw something, unless I know I'm going to animate it, I come over here and I right click on the word that says right click and I say remove polygon polyline. So that way if I want to manipulate this with show controls back on, I can come over here, I can alt or option drag that point to make any sort of tweaks on how that mask is coming through from my original foreground to this new background. So Command F, I'll deselect that mask. You can see I've been able to easily add in that original background. Here's the alpha channel we're looking at now. Edge mask blur. So this one is an extra polish step that you're never going to find in another YouTube tutorial that I've seen. But essentially, if you take a look at our comp right here, and we look at these edges here, you'll see there's sort of like a little black edge. It's clearly not integrated into the scene all that great. And one of the tricks to blend it better is to, after you've actually composited it, like we have here, is to just blur the edge, and just blur the edge only. But you blur the whole composite. You don't blur beforehand. So the idea is I'm pulling pixels from this background and from the foreground together, and I'll show you what that looks like. So I'm selecting merge, hitting shift space, blur, just a standard blur tool should work just fine. And if you take a look at the results of this and keep an eye on that shoulder there, you can see now all of a sudden this blends really nice. It did create another issue, is I blurred the entire image, so this is going to be my custom edge mask setup so that we can limit this to just the area that we need to blend the new background with the original foreground, right? So here's how we're going to do that. I am going to take the output of this mask right here, which we're pretty happy with, right? Doing all right. And I'm going to make an edge mask from this. So if I hit Command F so you can see the whole thing, the idea here is first I'm going to blur that edge mask. This is the trick. Blur first. And we'll do this off to the side because we're essentially building an edge mask that's separate from the mask that's doing the compositing. So this one's just going to blur those edges just a little bit. You know, maybe even doesn't even need that much. Maybe something like 0.5. And then I'm going to make use of another curves tool to really precisely grab the semi-transparent edge right here, okay? Since we're working just on a mask, again, a good idea to turn off your RGB, and I will add another curves tool, so color curves. This color curves tool, again, just working on the alpha. And to build the edge mask out, I'm going to take the output of this blur into my background of the color curves. On the color curves, the way we can extract just a custom edge mask out of it, kind of like before, I'm going to select a point right at 0.5. I'll actually type it in 0.5, but the output, bring that all the way up to 1. And then on the far right side, we're going to actually drop that output down to 0. And then here's the secret to this. If you hit S here for smooth and S and S, what we've just done is given ourselves the ability to sculpt the inside and outside edge really, really precisely. This blur here is also going to control this as well. So you can see how nice, this is probably my favorite way of making an edge mask. So we can really, really, you know, hone that in. So if we were to take this output and stick this into the blur mask input, so here's our blur right now, we're blurring everything. The idea here is, what if we masked off the blur so it only was hitting the edges, right? So you can see now, if I saw this before, Command P turns it off and on, we've nicely blurred just those edges. But there's one more thing here that I'm missing, and that's the fact that I'm actually, this is not a composite, this bottom part, that's the actual real foreground. I want to stencil out this. So we're going to do this with another merge node to interact and combine masks. So I'm grabbing another merge, MRG, And this merge is going to take our edge mask. Okay, there's our nice edge mask. I'm going to take the output of this guy. And actually, again, all this sort of stuff. Turn off RGB. I don't know, maybe a developer will tell me I don't need to do that, but I want to make things as fast as possible, so I generally do that when I just work on masks. I'm going to take the output of the curves, stick this into the merge, and the other thing that I want to pay attention to is I want to subtract the area that I don't need masks. The area I don't need mask was this manual shape that we had drawn out with the polygon tool. This is the beauty of nodes, right? I'm going to take the output of this polygon mask into the foreground here, our merge, and it's not doing quite what I want initially because it's just putting one over the other. But what you can do is you can change the operator over here. Instead of being over, you can change this to something like stencil. And essentially what that did is it just made a stencil. It just cut out, so I just have that part that's going to get the blur that I want in this tool over here. So rather than taking the full body to blur, what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to just take this shoulder region, this top head region, to blur that in the composite. And so you can see if I turn this before and after, Command P, Command to turn that on and off, I'm not affecting this edge here, but it really, really helps turned on up there on that top part to get rid of that black edge, and really just, it pulls the color pixels all along. So let me hit Command F and you can sort of see what we're looking at there. And the nice thing about all this is it's really dynamic. Once you set this mask up, you can go in and say your client wanted this background instead. I can just come over here, take the output of here, stick this into the merge, and let's look at the output of the blur. You know, I've got a result with that background. What if we want to use this background, this mountain shot instead? Just take this, stick this into the background, load this into the viewer. I've changed the background once again. So you can see it's really, really flexible, but there's more we can do to this to sell it even further, and we're going to look at that next. Film Look Creator Grain. DaVinci Resolve has a great grain generator tool that's on the color page as part of their Film Look Creator. If you haven't noticed, the image I'm working with, the composite with, this right here, is denoised already, so there's not a lot of flicker in it. It's already taken care of. And the still images obviously have no movement, no grain, so we're going to add Film Look Creator Grain. I think I like this image the most, so we're going to go with this as our final. We'll go to the color page, add this extra polish. We'll go to Effects. I'm going to search for it. We'll call this one Film Look Creator. Drag it onto the node. And as soon as I do that, I'm going to turn this to Clean Slate. And then just come down here. If you hit Shift F, you get a nice tall inspector over here. I like to have that because I have a low resolution monitor right now. I'm going to change this to grain, enable grain. I'll maybe make this 16 millimeter because this is for YouTube to make it really, really obvious what's happening. And you can see if I scroll in here, that looks like I'm pretty well integrated into this fake background set extension, all from the simple rendered out magic mask from the edit page. Back on the edit page, this is the final result. If I pause and I hit Shift D, you'll see the before. Looks like I pretty nicely manipulated that magic mask to work with. Now, my name is Chadwick. I super appreciate you. This is Creative Video Tips. This footage is actually available for you to download and start to play along with and learn how to combine masks by joining the Cutting Club. Go to creativevideotips.com/cutting club. You'll not only get access to this clip, but a lot more for all my free YouTube tutorials. And because there's so much more to learn, I'll see you in the next video.
How's it going, guys? So in today's tutorial, we're going to be creating this logo animation. We're going to be using geometry nodes, and it's really simple to build. First, we're going to take the logo and distribute some points on it. Then we're going to take that and make it a little bit more 3D in some Z space. Then we can displace it using a noise texture. After that, we're going to distribute some spheres and some flat planes so that we can get a little bit of glitter and brightness and some color distribution in this animation. After that, it's just going to come down to lighting, animation, and we're going to be done. So it's really simple, but super effective and a really cool animation. If you'd like to get the finished project file, that is available right now on my Patreon, along with a ton of other training on the Patreon. Every month, I'm releasing exclusive tutorials on the Patreon, quite often full collections that are thematic, motion graphics or logos or text or specific processes and maybe shading or geometry nodes, but there's a lot of really cool things on the Patreon that you can check out and learn even more from. If you want to check it out, that's going to be linked in the description, and you can get a discount if you subscribe annually. With that being said, let's get into this tutorial. All right, so to start out, go ahead and grab your logo. If you don't have a logo and you just want to follow along with this, I would say just take some text and pick a letter that you like, right click and convert it to a mesh, and you will be good to go to follow out the rest of this tutorial. Now, if you have a logo in vector format, what you'll do is go to File, Import, and select SVG. I'm going to go ahead and grab my logo in SVG format, and then I'm going to go ahead and scale it up because they import really small, at least mine does. And then I'm going to hit Tab just to get that anchor point right there in the middle of my logo. I'm just using G to move it. And then, very important, just because it'll kind of throw off your whole system, make sure you hit Control A and apply the scale. That's going to make sure the points distribute properly so that this thing doesn't look like it's tiny. All right, with that being said, let's go ahead and I'm going to open up a new window, and we are going to switch over this window up here to the geometry nodes editor, and I'm going to click new. So first thing we want to do is hit Shift A and get a distribute points on faces node, and then we can just bring out that density, but specifically, instead of random, go ahead and use Poisson disk. What that's going to do is give you this distance minimum. I'm going to bring my density to, say, I don't know, 1,000, and then you see this distance minimum, that is going to prevent them from intersecting, but I really just want it to be the smallest it can be, maybe 0.01, because these objects are going to be really small. Just having the slightest bit of control over their collision will go a long way. So we'll take this density, and now what I want to do is make it a little bit thicker this direction, because that's going to just make it look better. So we'll get a set position node. We're going to get a combine XYZ node because I just want to move it on the Z. So that's going to allow us to have access to a Z socket, and we're going to get a random value node and plug it right into the Z, and that's going to go ahead and essentially extrude it. So maybe if you don't want it all the way there, you can kind of keep it in the middle, but that's just about as thick as I'd like it to be. And so now I'm looking at my logo here. So what we can do now is set up the noise texture that is going to actually be able to allow us to make all these particles fly out in this really interesting way. So what I'm going to do is just duplicate this set position node, get a vector math node, and we're going to get a noise texture as our pretty much like our displacement. So make sure that you use the color, because if you use factor, it's only going to kind of move them what would look like two axes. It's combining the XYZ into sort of this random diagonal. The color socket gives you multiple colors, which gives you X, Y, and Z movement. So we're going to click on normalize to keep everything in the middle and plug color into vector, and you're going to get this. Now, right now it's at add. We need to switch this over to multiply. What multiply in this case is going to serve as a strength value. So if you just click and drag, it's going to adjust the strength of the noise texture, and that's what we're going to use to this is going to be one of our animated values. Now you'll notice these points look huge, and if you're not ready to start instancing objects in here and adding geometry, what we're going to do is get a set point radius node, and then you can sort of bring them down a little bit to get a better idea of, okay, this is going to be how it's going to look at the end. So maybe we'll bring up that density max to maybe 5,000, and then you can go back and play with that noise texture. So what I want to do is switch this noise texture over to 4D, because this is also going to be another value that we're going to animate. And I'm going to bring my scale to 1 and my detail to maybe 5, and you'll see we'll get a really, really cool movement. And then the more you bring that scale up, the more interesting, or really just more different it's going to look. If you like sort of a recognizable pattern, you can keep that scale around the 1, 2, or 3, or if you want it to be very just all over the place, you can bring it to a larger value, and then it kind of looks like a cluster of bugs or whatever coming in. But I tend to like it to look like kind of a discernible pattern to some degree. I really prefer that. All right, now what I want to do is instance some objects. So what we need to do is get a separate geometry node, because I want some of the objects to be spheres and other objects to be these flat circles. So make sure it stays at the default point. And what we're going to do is get a instance on points node, and we're going to get a icosphere here, and we'll plug mesh into instance, and then we'll bring that radius down. But there's no actual separation happening right now. It's just instancing icospheres on all of the points. We need to get a random value node that is set to Boolean, so that when we throw it into the selection, you can actually separate. And so see how there's missing, we're deleting points in a sense. That's because we have an inverted socket. So all the spots where you're seeing objects going away, they are now, those spots are being occupied by the inverted. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna duplicate this instance on points, plug inverted into that, and we'll get a join geometry node and plug instances into geometry. And then we're gonna get a mesh circle and plug mesh into instance, and they're gonna be huge. First off, we need to switch this over to ingon, and then bring that radius in. I'm gonna give them vertices of 6, and then bring that in again. And so now we have random distribution of each. What I want is more spheres than I have essentially these. They're gonna look like glitter in the render, so we're just gonna keep them at that. Right here in the icosphere, I'm gonna give it a subdivision of 1 just to keep everything smooth, and we'll get a set shade smooth node, and then I'm gonna get another random value node and plug it into the scale of our spheres. Looks like it's randomizing. Yep, okay, so we'll bring these down, bring these up a little bit. I do want randomness in the scale of our spheres, so something like that. And then we'll get another random value node, and we need to plug it into the rotation of the flat spheres, and then we'll just randomize it like that, and that is going to help when the light hits them. They will reflect really nicely, and then I do want them to be a little bit smaller. I want them to be kind of a subtle glitter. And then, now that we're here, I still think the spheres are too big, but I'm going to go ahead and bring up the density to 20,000, and then I'm going to go back to my random value that's controlling the spheres and just bring them smaller, bring a couple bigger. And then I think that's good. That's good for now. We can go ahead and add color into the scene. So I'm going to go here to the material preview, and we're going to get 2 materials here in geometry nodes. We're going to get a set material node and just duplicate it. So this, see where it says mesh circle, see that line? So this bottom one here, that is going to represent the metal or the metallic gold material that we're going to make, and the other one is going to be that nice red. So let's select this one, make it kind of a interesting red. You can really obviously do any color you want. I'm going to bring my roughness all the way up, and then I'm going to select it there. And then here on this material, we're going to make it metallic, pretty rough, and then a gold color, and then grab it there. And so now we have all of that. So now we can go into the lighting of this scene. So I'm just going to bring this geometry nodes window over a little bit, and I'm going to go ahead and get a camera. So Shift A, get a camera, I'll hit G and middle click, and then just position it. We're going to right over here in the camera settings, give it 24 millimeters, G and middle click again, something like that. And this right here, my immediate thought is, okay, the density needs to be higher on how many objects are in this scene. So what I'm going to do is right here on the distance minimum, maybe 0.005 ought to give us a good amount of density. So that looks really, really nice. So now we can go ahead, I'm going to bring this window back, and we can go into lighting. So I'm going to go here to the cycles view. I am using cycles for this. I'm going to be denoising my scene, and I'm going to be using 300 on the samples. So here in the world, we'll bring it down to black. I'm going to go ahead and get in a area light, hit G, and we're going to do a single lighting setup. This is something I do really often, and honestly is useful in so many cases. So we're going to use a disc shape to make it nice and big, and then we're going to go here to the cycles preview and maybe bring my power of like 2000. Here in the world, we'll go here to the volume and add a principled volume node, and then 0.01 is going to give us a nice volume. And then back to the camera settings, we can bring that spread down until we have a little bit of black here. Then I'm just going to go ahead and get a render region. So it looks like 2000 is too bright. Let's go with like 500 for now. So here we go. We have this scene, and it looks really nice right now. I'm going to click on this and go to the red here, and I'm just going to go ahead and hover over it, hit Control C, go to the camera, I'm going to hit Control V, and then I'm just going to bring the saturation down so that we get this uniformity, I think is the right word, a uniformity in the color. So now that we're here, what I want to do is at certain points in the scene, see how this piece of metal is really bright? It's really bright. It's reflecting, it's directly reflecting that light, and it's going to be very bright. But it's hard to communicate how bright that is if we don't have any compositing. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna render out one frame and add some glare in the compositor. All right, so we have a frame rendered out. I'm gonna go here to the compositing, I'm gonna click use nodes. I'm gonna go ahead and get a viewer node, and then I'm gonna hit shift and right click, and then we're gonna get a glare node. Plug it there, and then we're gonna go here to bloom. And then we're just going to go ahead and on the highlights, I'm going to bring that threshold up just a little bit so that we can just kind of highlight those points there. And then we can go back, I'm going to say click maybe, and then you can hit this drop down and click always, and you'll get to see those points. So now I'm going to go and animate this. So we're going to bring our window back. And then in your preferences, right here where it says linear, so go to the animation preferences, go here, switch it over to Bezier, and we're going to animate this. So go to your vector math node. I'm going to go ahead and bring it out to something like that. I'm going to hit I, go to frame 200, and then type in 0 and hit I again. So this is the animation we have so far. We'll just view it one more time. Now there's another piece of this animation that we can add some movement into it to make it look a little bit more alive and more organic, and that is going to be this W value, but it's really sensitive, so make sure we just do a little bit. So I'm going to go back to my preferences and switch this back to linear. I'm going to hit I on the W, go to 200, and I'm just going to move it a tad bit to like 0.03 maybe. And that is just going to randomly move these objects around. Even 0.03 is too much. Maybe 0.01. No, needs to be 0.1, not 0.01. 0.1. There we go. There we go. So now they're just moving around at a more reasonable speed. Nice. All right. So now I just want to view the compositing. See these little glare moments? So now we have these little really nice little highlight moments here in the scene that's just going to make it look a little bit more beautiful. And then maybe even see the random value that's like connected to the separate geometry. Just bring that back. Maybe a few more pieces of glitter. There we go. That's going to be awesome. Okay. We are done with this animation, so I'm just going to close the geometry nodes window. We can double check this animation looks proper. That looks really good. So for your render settings, I'm going to keep it at 250 frames. Actually, no, maybe 230, just so after it animates, it has some time to sit. I'm going to keep it at 300 samples. Right here on the printer icon, I'm going to keep it. If you want to check out the official project file for this, that's 4, and then you'll have a really cool animation. So there you go, that's how you create a really cool logo particle animation. It's really simple. Again, if you want to
Buildings, buildings, buildings. You want a set, but you don't want to spend days modeling. I got it. Here's one way to build a modular set that can keep on giving, like Long Covina, California. I'm going to combine some ancient techniques made popular by the Ian with some geometry node stuff. Simple geometry node stuff, so don't worry. Let's go. Start with an image. It can be any image. I found this one on a public domain image site, so it's totally cool to use. I chose to bring this in as an image plane on the floor. You don't need to do this as most of the work will be in the UV texture space for positioning later, but whatever. Add in a plane and space it out over the image. This part is not really necessary, but I like seeing the image in the viewport. Next, we give the plane a shader. Select principled shader and hit Ctrl T because we have Node Wrangler working. And in the image icon, select the image we brought in before. There, now the image is on our plane. Magic, baby, yeah. Now, go over to the UV workspace on the left side of the screen. Select the points and drag them into position to frame one apartment. You'll see the image clear up on your plane, and that's a good thing. We can now get rid of the image plane. We don't need it anymore. In fact, we never really did. Now, here's an important part for this to work with what's coming. Scale the dimensions of the plane to be a standard measurement. I chose 5 meters wide by 3 meters tall. 4.3 meters or something like that is the story, but this works for this. You can use real world scale if you want, just keep some ratio. I turned the roughness up on the shader here to get rid of the shine too. Here's where we can use the ancient technique of extruding and faking relief made popular in Blender lately. We use Ctrl R to add loop cuts and slide the cuts into place on all the major relief lines. You can use the knife tool too. At this resolution it won't kill you to have some extra polys, but you do you. Go in and fix the UVs if you need to, then grab the windows and extrude them slightly. You can also cut around the air conditioners and extrude them out as well. The UVs will stretch on the tops and sides, but check later if they're an issue. You can also reproject them and find a good texture area for them later if it's a big problem. Lastly, extrude the edges back a bit to give it some thickness if you want. We can also select the windows and give them a new shader, then make them shiny by bringing down the roughness on the new shader too if it helps. Just make sure you assign the new shader to the selected polygons. Do this a bunch of times and you'll now have many variations. Put them in a collection. I called mine facades. Here's the part you've been waiting for, or not, I have no idea. Go to the cube, rename it whatever you want. I chose GeoNodes because it's original. I like to select all the points on this thing and merge it all together so I have one point. There's no actual reason to do this other than I saw Red Jam do it and I thought, yeah, that's cool, I'm gonna do that. Now, with this thing selected, go to the Geometry Nodes tab and hit New. This is not meant to be a full Geometry Nodes tutorial, by the way, and I'm going to keep it very simple from here. There are far more complex and elegant setups you can do. This is not one of them. It just works and it lets me keep track of things in a relatively tidy way. This stuff is so new and it's like probably all going to change again anyway in a month, but for now, add in a new collection info node. Pick the facades collection and check separate children. What a horrible name for that. Next, add in a mesh line and plug it into the group output. Add in an instance on points node between them and plug in the collection info node into the instance and check pick instance. Now move the Z offset up on the mesh line by 3 meters. This is the height of our building facades. What this is doing is stacking the facades every 3 meters and attaching them to the points on the mesh line. See that gap there? It's not supposed to be there. It's the sun in the collection. Once I take that out, I get the results I want to get. The count on the mesh line controls the amount and height of the stack. Fun times. Now, to lift the whole thing up and sit it on
You might have noticed in recent Blender updates that Geometry Nodes has been getting quite a bit of attention. And you might be wondering what geometry nodes is and why you might use it. Here's a summary of what I'll So the geometry nodes modifier is a tool within Blender that you can use for generative modeling. And as time goes on, it's getting a lot of the functionality that exists already in modifiers and the particle system, but with the added benefit of it using nodes, which I'll talk more about later. If you're familiar with procedural or generative modeling, you'll know that there are some advantages over traditional modeling. First thing to note is that generative modeling is non-destructive, meaning that your actions can be changed or undone really easily. In traditional modeling, if you want to change something you did in the past, you're stuck with hitting the undo button a million times, or maybe deleting parts of your model and redoing them. For example, with geometry nodes, I can start a scene with a sphere, and if I decide later down the road that I wanted to start with a cube instead, it's as easy as replacing one node. I don't have to lose all of the progress that I made. Another thing to know about geometry nodes is that this video is sponsored by Sketchfab. If you're interested in product photography and you want to make drinks look more realistic, you can use this method to add some condensation. You can also use this to add dew to grass, or you can make Suzanne look sweaty. Here's a summary of what I'll cover. I'll bring in an object that I want to add water droplets to, as well as a separate object to use for geometry nodes. I'll scatter a bunch of points onto the object, turn all of those points into a volume, and then turn the volume into a mesh. In this one, I'll be recreating the effect we see in the outer shell of this ball. It's basically each face being scaled down based on a noise texture. I'll be using the 3.1 alpha for this one, but it works in 3.0 also. Check my Patreon for all the project files from my videos, coupon codes for free Gumroad products, and a bunch of other files that I don't share anywhere else. I also donate some of the profits to environmental causes each month. Link is in the description. Here's a summary of what we'll cover. We'll hop into geometry nodes and talk about how to get each face to scale down. Then we'll go over animating it with a noise texture, including how to get it to loop properly. And last, I'll show a different way of achieving this effect using modifiers instead of geometry nodes. Alright, let's get started. So here we are in Blender. I'm using version 3.1 alpha for this one. You can use 3.0 if you want and follow along just fine. I'll let you know what the differences are when we actually come to them. And one other thing is that screencast keys isn't working, so you won't be able to see what keys I'm pressing over here, but I'll just try to let you know what I'm actually pressing. So first of all, we can start off with just an empty scene, and I'll add in a plane. This is where we're going to put our geometry nodes modifier onto. So I'll go up over here, open a geometry nodes window like that, and we can just click new right here to add a geometry nodes modifier. So we're not going to need this group input, so I'll delete that with X, and Shift A and then S to search. And I'm going to add in an icosphere. This is what we're going to start with. So we can just plug that in right there. And I'll add a few subdivisions, maybe like, I'll add 4 for right now. And I'll turn cavity on just so we can see that a little better. You can actually see it's made out of a bunch of triangles. And I like using a matte cap too, so I'll turn that on. Alright, so if you're using version 3.1 at the time of recording, you can add in a dual mesh node right here. You can see when I do that, it's turning everything into hexagons and pentagons right there. Don't worry if you're using 3.1, this will still work without this. You know, you'll just be working with triangles instead. So I'll leave this on here. Next, what we have to do is we have to split all of the edges, because basically what we're going to do is make it so that each face is scaling down, but if they're all connected, then they won't, you know, they'll be connected so they can't separate from each other. So we need to split the edges. So Shift A, then S, and I'll search for split edges, like that. So when we put this on, it'll visually look the same, but what's actually happening is each of these faces is, you know, not connected to each other right now. So next what we need to do is find the position of each face. So this is actually not too hard. We can just use a capture attribute right here, and we want to change this from point to face because we're looking for, you know, the face data. And float, we need to change this to vector because float is just one value. Vector, we're going to need, you know, the position of each face, so the X, Y, and Z position. And the value that we want, the attribute we want, is the position. So you can search for position and just plug that in right there. So now this attribute right here is going to show us, it's going to give us the position of each face. You can kind of imagine that as like a single point in between every face, and it's giving us the location of each of those points. So now we need a set position. You can plug that in here. You just want to run the geometry through like that. And so now if we use this attribute and plug that directly into position, it looks like it disappears, but what's really happening is it's scaling all of the faces down to a single point, and we can't see the points. So what we need to do is blend between the regular position and this attribute right here. So we can do that with a mix RGB. We can just I'll plug the attribute into the second color slot and the position into the first. And now when we plug the color into the position right here, you can see what's actually going on. We can control the face size with this factor slider right here. So if we set it all the way down, it'll look normal. And if we put this all the way to 1, it'll scale each face down to like a single point, like that. What's cool about this is we can plug textures into the factor right here. Also, if you want to be able to see this a little better, I like to add a solidify afterward, like that, so they won't be flat faces. You can give them some thickness if you want. You just have to click back on the geometry nodes modifier right here to get these, the nodes back. So what we're going to do now is bring in a noise texture with Shift A, S to search, and I'll look for noise. And we can plug the factor of the noise into this factor right here. It's a little hard to see what's going on, so you can control this a few different ways. Usually what I use is a map range. You could also use a color ramp if you want. And now I'll just put these two values closer together, so I'll do 0.4 for the minimum and 0.6 for the maximum, like that. This is going to be a little hard to see until you add more faces, so we can go back to the subdivisions and just turn this up a little bit. 5 should be good. And I'll turn the detail all the way down so we have a smoother texture, and I'll turn this down to 2. And now you can actually see what shapes we have going on, these like big open blobs like that. So you might get some weird things going on. You can see like this face right here is kind of messed up, and that's because these are scaling down. It's like kind of taking a bunch of points and cramming them together. And when they get really close, I think the solidify is what makes it kind of glitch out. Instead of these scaling all the way down, we can set it so I think what we have to change is the 2 max. If we change this as like 0.9 or something like that, you can see instead of scaling all the way down to a singular point, they just scale down to this like, it's kind of small, but it's not 0. And that will prevent any of those glitches. And I think it looks cool too. You could also do that with the 2 minimum so that if you want, you could make it so that these don't actually touch when they get to their maximum value, like that. I like to leave it at 0, just all the way up. Now, if we set this to 4D, we can change this W value to get some motion. One other thing that you can do in 3.1, there's this node called scene time, like that. And this will make it so when you can get the seconds in the frame that you're on. So if we plug the seconds into the W and hit the spacebar to play, you can see it starts moving. If you're using 3.0 and you want to do the same thing, basically what you have to do is use a driver. So I usually use a value for this. If you want, you can actually type this directly into W, but this is the way I like to do it. So in here, I'll just type hash frame, like that. And this will just return the frame that we're on. When we hit play, you can see this goes up. And we can plug the value into the W. This will go way too fast. So if you want, you could do division in here, like divided by 60, like that. I like to just use a math node and divide it like this. And I'll change this to 60, something like that. And you can change this value on the fly to whatever you want instead of typing it in. So that's why I like to do it. Yeah, also keep in mind that we are set to 24 frames per second. Changing this will kind of change how fast things are moving on your screen. You might have to affect this value if you change that one. I'll just get rid of these. If you want this to loop, the way that I did it is I used 2 different noise textures, like this, and I used a mix RGB to mix them together. So I'll just plug the factor into the first color and the second factor into the second color. Now we can blend between these 2 noise textures with the factor right here, and they're both set to the same. They both have all the same values, so this isn't going to look any different. We need a timeline, or I'll use a dope sheet. Bring that up here. I want to go to frame 0, like that. and I'm going to set this to 0. So basically, when it first starts, it's going to use this one, and at the very end, it's going to use this noise texture right here. So I want to blend between them. I'll have this set to 0 at frame 0, then we go to the very end, the last frame, which in this case is 250. I'll change this to 1 and hit I, hover over it, hit I to insert a keyframe there. I'll have this one, this top one, on frame 0 be set to 0, like that, and at the very end, we'll have it set to 1. And for this to loop properly, basically I want this one to end where this one begins. So you can see, this starts at 0, so we want this one to end at 0. Go to last frame, insert a keyframe with I, and I'll go back to 0 now. And if we want this to move the same speed, we just have to turn this one to be -1 on frame 0, and I'll insert a keyframe there. So if you can't see any of these keyframes, try pressing this button right here. Once again, I'm using the dope sheet. It'll make it so that it'll show all of the keyframes, whether you have them selected or not. So I'm gonna hit A to select everything, T, and change the interpolation to linear. And so now these will all move at a constant rate. When we hit play and it goes from the end to the beginning, you shouldn't see any stuttering. And it just keeps going like that. So the speed you make this is really going to depend on the scale and stuff like that. You want to make sure that both of these noise textures have the same values in there except for the W. So if you change the scale of one, you should change the scale of the other, or else it won't loop right. So an easy way to change the speed of this is go into the graph editor. So I'll hit Control Tab. That's the shortcut to get into the graph editor. Once again, I'll hit this, and then we'll be able to see all of our keyframes. Select everything with A, hit period on the numpad to zoom in. And now we can see our values. This is where the first one starts. This is where the second noise texture ends. What we want to do is just select this, the lowest point and the highest point right there. Hit period to make sure that you're using the bounding box center as the pivot point. And if you scale these apart, you want to make sure you hit S and then Y to constrain it to the Y axis. This is an easy way to make your animation faster or slower. And you know it'll still loop properly because they both start and end at the same point right there. So if this is moving too slow for you, you just want to scale it up on the Y axis like that, and it will go faster, but it'll still loop properly. So you can get a similar result without geometry nodes by just using a bunch of modifiers. So I'll just do that really quick. I'll use a plane as an example, tab into edit mode, subdivide this a few times. Basically what we would need to do is add a edge split like that. I'll turn this down to 0, and then a smooth like that. This is doing a very similar thing where you're splitting all of the edges so they're separated, and then you're using the smoothing to scale each face down. You can use a vertex group if you want to use like a texture to control this. That's a little more complicated. I'll let it solidify. Basically what you'd have to do is use a vertex weight edit. I'll put this at the very beginning, and we need a vertex group. So you can go over here to Object Data Properties, add a vertex group like that. We'll go up here, make sure that group is selected, and the group should be selected for your smooth modifier too. And then we'll use group add right here, so it's adding things to the group. For the fall off, we just want to invert this right there. So it's using the same fall off type, but we're inverting it. And for the influence, we can add a texture right here. So I'll just add a texture, go over here to the texture so we can actually see it, and I'll change this to clouds. So one downside of doing it this way is you have to use the textures over here instead of using them in the node editor. So you do have a lot more options when you're using the node editor. Pretty much all of the same options you would have with shaders. So if you want, you can mix textures, you could use images. You could use images over here, but you can mix procedural textures and things like that. Quite a bit easier with more control, things like that. This is tied to your topology, your like mesh resolution. So you have to like add more geometry for this to work correctly. You could probably use a subdivision surface for this also, but this is like a different way of going about it. It's very similar to the geometry nodes method. You just have fewer options basically. Alright, that's it for this one. Let me know what else you'd like to learn about geometry nodes. Once again, you can find this project file on my Patreon. I'd like to thank my patrons for their support, and I'd like to thank you for watching. Have a good one. Today we'll be creating this animation with geometry nodes. Don't worry if you haven't used GeoNodes yet, because this one will be pretty quick and simple. Alright, let's get started. Okay, so here we are. I'm in Blender 2.93.2. If you want the most geometry nodes features, you should probably be using the 3.0 alpha, but this has all of the features that we need, so this is the one I'm going to use for now. So let's just get started. First thing we're going to need is a cube. And we're just going to duplicate that. So we have 2 cubes, and these are the only meshes that we're going to need. This one is going to have our geometry nodes modifier on it, so I'm just going to name it Geo. And this one is going to be the one that we're instancing, so I'm just going to rename that Instanced. Like that. And I'm just going to pull a window up right here. And I'm going to turn it to the geometry nodes editor right here. You just want to make sure you're selecting this one in the center, and you can just hit new. And when you do that, it'll just give you the input and the output. And if you go over to your modifiers, you can see it has a geometry nodes modifier now. So I'm just going to move this further away, just so it doesn't get in the way. Basically what we're going to do is create a bunch of points, and each point is going to have a cube, this instance cube right here. So I'm going to hit Shift A and then S to search, and I'm going to bring in a point instance like this. And you can see it's going to go away immediately. And that's because the original geometry is only being used for instancing now. And if you want to see your original geometry, you can bring in a join geometry node right here. And you can just plug this one in over here like that. And I'm going to add a reroute with Shift right click and drag like that. Just make it a little easier to see. So the instanced object, we can use instanced right here. So now what is happening is it's looking at all of the vertices of our original cube and placing one of these cubes at each one. So if you want to see this a little more clearly, you can add in a point scale and just put it before your point instance. I'm going to change this to float just so it's one value. And if we turn it down, you can see a little more clearly what's happening. So at each corner, basically, we're getting one of these cubes. If you want this to be more random, you can also add in a point distribute, like this. And you can control how many points there are with the density. So I'm just going to turn this down to something lower, like 0.2. And if you want to change the random pattern, you can change the seed right there. If you want to rotate your cubes, you can also add in a point rotate right here. And you just want it before your point instance like that. And you can see we can rotate these however we want. But if you wanted these to rotate separately, each point to be rotated like kind of randomly, you could do that. You have to add in a attribute randomize right here. I'm just going to put this at the beginning. And we need a new attribute. So you can see all of the attributes that exist right now, but you can type in whatever you want here. So I'm just going to type in rand, and it's going to create a new attribute for us like that. And then over here, we have to change rotation to attribute. And then we can plug in the one that we just created, which was called rand, like that. And you can see now they are all random. They're rotated a random amount between these two values right here, between 0 and 1. If you made both of these 1, they would all have the same rotation like that. And we can do this for scale also. So I'll change this to attribute, and we can just type in rand. So you can see these are all the same size now, and that's because these are the same number. So we can set our maximum scale and our minimum scale. I'll set the maximum to 1 and the lowest one to maybe like 0.2 or something like that. If we set this to 0, we might get some that get too small, like this one right here. Another thing that I want to do is make all of these rotate around the center. So we can do that by adding in a transform node right here. You can see if you add it after the point instance, it will rotate all of them. It'll change the location and the rotation of each of those instanced cubes. If we put it before, it acts slightly differently. So they're all keeping their same like original rotation, and they're just kind of changing their location to orbit around the center of our original cube right there. And this is the effect that I'm actually looking for. So next, what we're going to do is basically join all of the instanced cubes together and then cut that shape out of our original cube right here. So we can get rid of our join geometry node over here. We were just using that for viewing. So I'll just delete that with Control X right there and add in a Boolean right here. And we're gonna leave that set to difference. And what we're gonna do is plug all of our instance stuff into geometry 2. And you'll see it'll break momentarily, but once we plug our original geometry right here into geometry 1, it'll start working. You can see now it's just cutting all of the instanced shapes out of our original cube right here. And we can still edit all of these nodes. So if I rotate this, you can see we're starting to get that effect that I showed you from the beginning, like that. So you can animate this pretty easily by just typing in hash and then frame, like that. And you'll see it'll just be way too fast. So to slow it down, you can just divide it by whatever amount. I'm gonna divide it by 100, and I think that's gonna be a good speed for us. So you have to be pretty careful with this Boolean node, because if you turn up your density right here for your points too high, you'll definitely crash this. So that's why I have mine set to something small like 0.2. If I even set it to like 0.4, you can see my frame rates start to drop. And if you set it to something like 1, I don't even know if this will play. Yeah, really low frame rate. So definitely be careful and make sure you're saving your project. Another thing that I think is pretty cool looking is just changing this instance shape right here. So I'm gonna add a modifier to it over here. I'm gonna add a solidify. And if you've used a solidify before, you know what this does. If you change the thickness, it's basically making it hollow, and you get to decide how thick you want the hull or the edge to be, like that. So you can see, instead of cutting out solid shapes, it's just cutting out like the outline now. And I think that is pretty neat also. And you can make it more geometric if you delete this point rotate right here. You can dissolve it with Control X. Oh yeah, if you're having a hard time seeing all of these flat objects, you can come up to here. I'm in solid mode. And you can come up here and just turn on cavity. And I like to have mine set to both. And you can see it kind of highlights the edges a little more. And you can see flat things quite a bit better. So you can see this is just making it a lot more geometric. I don't know, I think it's a pretty cool effect. So you can get a lot of different results just by changing this instanced object right here. All you have to do now is set up a camera, add some lights, maybe a few materials, and you're good to go. Alright, that's it for this one. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.
Alright, welcome to another second channel video. In this one, I'm just going to be talking about simulation nodes and things that I've learned how to do with them. So, it's not going to be about any one thing. I'm just going to be rattling off things that I know. So let's start off by adding in a plane. It can be anything because we're not really going to be using the original geometry. So let's go over to geometry nodes. I'll hide this on the side for now. We'll pull it open if we need it. And we can add a new node tree. And just to explain what simulation nodes do, the simulation zone, we'll leave the original geometry for now, but we're going to delete it really soon. So let's bring in a simulation zone. It'll have these two nodes right here, and you can hook everything up like this. Basically, everything that happens in this zone right here is going to happen every single frame. So if we use a set position node right here, and we place it on the outside, it'll work just like you would expect it to. Even if you press play, it'll just stay right here. But if we put it in here, set it to something small like 0.01, and then we press play, this will move up this distance every single frame. And turns out you can kind of do a lot with that functionality. And just so this doesn't restart after, not very long, let's go back and just turn this to a really high number. I'm going to turn it to 30,000. It'll basically just not start over on its own. Okay, so now let's delete the original geometry, and I'm going to use some points for this to make it look kind of like a particle simulation. Let's add in a points node right here. You can drop this in. And a shortcut you'll see me use pretty often is a shift and left arrow, and that's basically just going to bring it back to the first frame to make the simulation restart like this. So I'm going to be using that. Now we can add a lot of them, maybe like 500, and I want the position to start off a little more random, so we can drag this out, add a random value right here, and just so it's not only going in the positive direction, let's set the minimum to be -1, like that. And if you want this to change in size, you can, just move these around, but usually what I'll do is add a scale node. This is a vector math node set to scale, and then you can, move it. So I'm doing all of this outside of the simulation zone so that, we don't get points every single frame. I'll show more about that later because you can get some interesting effects adding things in every frame. Okay, so press play, this happens. First thing that I thought of doing was just, instead of, adding the offset like this, is you use some noise, and it ends up doing interesting stuff because it's noise. So let's add in a noise texture. If you want, you can just plug this in directly and it'll just fly away because everything is going in the positive direction. So to make that not happen, bring in a vector math subtract node, drop this in, set this to 0.5, everything to 0.5. So now this should push in every direction. Long story short, this is 3 different values like we have here, and each one is between 0 and 1. So if you're adding, it's always going to go in the positive direction, but if you subtract it by 5, the 0.5, then the midpoint becomes 0, and it will not just fly away, basically. So let's duplicate this with Shift D, turn this to scale so we can change the strength of it. So now if we press play, this will just spread out and go crazy. You don't want it to do that. And turn the detail down and maybe set the scale to be something quite a bit smaller. Now these will fly away, but in a more clean manner. Like they'll be going into these trails like that, and they will naturally kind of settle in certain spots that I guess must be low values, closer to 0. So let's make this a little weaker so we can actually see it move like that. If you don't want it to be in trails like this as much, then there are a few things you can do. You can turn the detail up and things will kind of spread apart a little more. Or you can set this to 4D and you can change the W over time and it'll make it so it doesn't settle as often. If you want to do that, you can use a scene time node. You can animate this too, but I like to use the scene time. You can just plug in the seconds, and now, the texture will just change randomly in a smooth way like that. Another thing you can do to make them kind of not go into these trails where they're all following each other is make it so that each point should have a different W value. The way you can do that is with an index node right here. So this is just going to count the points and give them a number. So, the first point will be 0, the second point will be 1, 2, 3, 4, it just goes on like that. And then when you plug this into here, all of them will have a different W value, and it becomes a lot more random like this. They'll move in the same kind of speed and manner, it's just that they don't really move together anymore. And you can make this more or less apparent with a math node set to multiply. You can divide it too if you want, and just make this really small. So they will still go in trails, but they kind of diverge from each other a little more. This is a lot more apparent when all of your particles start in the center, because if you're not using this at all, if you're not using the index to change the W, then all of the points will move together like this. But as soon as you plug it in, they will start to diverge from each other a little more like this. And you can see they naturally just kind of branch away and create trails like this. And like I said, the more you turn this up, if you turn it up to 1, it's almost just like a cloud expanding. It's pretty random. So I'm just gonna set this back to 0 for now, but I'll leave it there for, you know, if any of you get the file from Patreon. So let's tidy this up. I'm just going to select all of these, Control J to put a frame around them. Just know that everything in here is just noise being added. Okay, so let's see. Another thing that we can do, if you want to like create, if you want multiple particles to be spawned in over time, an interesting way to do that, let's just set this to 1, make it simple. You can add in a join geometry node right here, and then every frame you can make it so that 1 point is added right here, and it's going to create this trail. One thing about doing this is you can see the points are just adding up over time, and they're never really going to get deleted. So if you want them to get deleted, you have to basically create a way to find the particle age, which is not very hard. But before we get down to that, if you have like multiple points right here, you can see they all kind of trail like this, and if you want them to always come in a random position, that's what the seed would be for. You can just use the frame from the scene time, and it'll make it so that every point that comes in will have a random, you know, value, a random position between these values right here. And it looks quite a bit more random, which is kind of neat. Make this smaller. So it's just kind of pouring out now, and it's also still, everything's being affected by this noise still. So yeah. But just so it doesn't add up over time, let's add particle age. So this is pretty easy. We use a store named attribute node right here. We can just name this age. And let's add a named attribute. And if you click on this and you don't see age, you don't see the thing that you just added, just go back to the first frame with shift and left arrow, and it should appear, hopefully. Let's add this into itself. And in here, we want to add by 1. So I'll search for add. Make sure this is set to 1. Okay. So basically what this is doing is it's creating an attribute called age, and every time, every frame that goes by, it's being added by 1. So it's kind of giving us the age of each particle as it comes in frames. And then if we want, we can delete them. So we can bring in a delete geometry node right here. Let's get this named attribute. And we can say for every particle that is older than like 30 frames, delete it. So to do that, we would get greater than. Every particle with an age greater than 30 frames should be deleted. That's what we're doing. Okay, now let's take a look at this. We should see that after a while, they just start deleting. You can see they're deleting about right here. That's the point where they reach 30 frames. If we want, we can turn this up quite a bit higher, maybe 3 times as long, so 90. And this is what's happening. So you can do some interesting stuff with this. First of all, you're not going to have like a ton of points that just keep adding up, which is nice because if you let it go for long enough, Blender is just going to crash. Let's tidy this up too. Call it age. So some other interesting things that you could do with this is make it scale over time or rotate more over time. You could use this named attribute in the shader side of things to change the color over time, things like that. Let's just scale it up or change the scale. We can do that with it's point radius, I believe. Set point radius right here. Let's grab the age, so Shift D, and if it's in a box you don't want it to be there, you can press Alt P. It's the same shortcut as unparenting things. Okay, so if we plug this in, they're gonna get huge because the radius is gonna go up to like 90. So we need to change this. You can like divide it. I like to use a map range node because you can also kind of change whether they're scaling up or down. So let's use a map range. Okay, so we want it, if we want it to scale up, let's see. We can make it so that it starts at a scale right here. We can make it start at something like 0.1 and then scale down to 0. But it's not going to look right until these kind of match. So we need to turn the from minimum to the maximum age. Start over. Oh, you know what? Because we already flipped it around down here, this should be 0 and this one should be 90. Okay, so now as time goes by, they will scale down like this. If you want them to scale up, basically you just want to make sure these are inverted. So you could change this to 0 and this to 0.1. They'll start small and then they'll get scaled up like that. Yeah, you can do interesting things like this. I guess if you wanted it to start small, scale up in the middle, and then end small, you could put something like a color ramp or a float curve in here. So let's do that just to see how it works. I'm kind of just experimenting at this point. Basically, you want it to start at 0 and end at 0, and then in the middle, you can make it scale up like that. And let's change the scale a little bit. Is that right? Doesn't seem to be right. Maybe it's because it's 1. Let's divide this after. Math, divide. So yeah, now it seems like it is working. Let's make this a little more random though. Maybe not. And let's make this go up like this. So it should start small, as we can see. Start small, end small, like that. So it's a little more seamless, I guess, if you do it this way. And we can tidy this up, just make sure everything's together. Okay, what else can we do? I like doing things like adding velocity and creating attractors and things like that. So let's just save this. I'll just call it sim1. And we'll duplicate it, and I'll call this velocity. Save that too. Okay, but we're not going to use some of this stuff. Like, I'm just gonna delete this, and we'll delete the age and make sure points aren't being added in all the time. Connect this back up. Or actually, let's remove this. And to get started with the velocity, let's just add in a store named attribute. Make sure this is a vector because it's going to be determining like the points in 3D space. So we need 3 fields, 3 numbers, whatever. I'm going to change this to V for vector, bring in a named attribute, and similar to age, we're going to feed it into itself like this. And we're going to use the velocity to set the position. Let's just plug this into the offset right now. So right now nothing will happen because we're not really at any point defining how this is changing yet. Basically, instead of setting the position somewhere outside here, we're going to change this value right here. So we can do that with an add node, a vector math node set to add right here, and you can just add forces and things like that to it. I'll show you what this does. Basically, let's just set this to 1 point right now and make it a little bigger. And turn the Z up just like a tiny little bit. So basically what this is going to do is it's going to start off slow and then it's going to get faster like that. If we set it to like -0.01 or something like that, it'll be kind of like if you have a ball in your hand and you just let go. So it starts off slow and then it keeps getting faster like that. Okay. And the reason for that is basically it's going to start off like the first frame, it's going to be moving this much. And then the second frame, it's going to add to itself. So instead of, 0.01 is going to be 0.02. And every frame that goes by is going to add this number to itself. And that's why it's getting faster. Similar to the age, like I said. Now, if you want it to eventually stop getting faster, you need to add some sort of dampening. And that is also pretty easy. You just do that with a scale node, a vector math node set to scale. So by default, if you have this set to 1, it's like there's no dampening or no friction or whatever, like no air resistance, and it'll just keep getting faster forever. But if you set this to something like 0.9, it will eventually slow down. So let's make this quite a bit bigger just so we can see it better. So you can see it kind of starts moving at this like